Another week, another episode. Welcome back to the Agent Boost podcast. Mike and I were talking about getting back to the basics. We've had a rapid fire, I would say, summer of a lot of guests, which we really did by design. We really liked it. Hopefully you all do too. We just feel like we like to mix it up and bring you some valuable guests on. We have a whole lineup, for next quarter as well. But we wanted to take a break intentionally and get back to the discussion and industry topics and things that are going on right now. So with that being said, we're going to dive into, do we want to talk about the PDPs or the other thing first?
Yeah, so the title of this episode, today's August 22nd, and we had AEP 2025, the perfect storm and the perfect opportunity, right? Because I think now we kind of know what the landscape is for AEP, and finally first looks have been coming out. We're getting a little bit more clarification. We're still very far behind, but...
Yeah, but for the record, what Mike's talking about, I think one of the biggest shifts that we've noticed this year, and you probably as maybe the broker or agent community has felt too, is that there's been a lack of communication or far less communication as to what's happening. And so we've had to more really dig deep, glean these little tidbits of information, and then be able to kind of predict and assume and start to understand what's going to happen as we piece together the landscape and plan for AEP. It's just the carrier partners, the payers, the insurance companies, shall we say, CMS, there's so many moving parts this year that they're just not being as direct with communication about what's happening.
And usually the industry had settled into a cadence that was pretty well set, right? Where we would know when plan bids were filed, you had NABA done, people didn't even really talk about those things. You had the war game season, you would have cert season come out, then you'd roll into first looks.
You'd have desk review done. And
and it was pretty much like clockwork, and then everybody could deploy their marketing strategies. Co-op asks were pretty much funded. The industry had
pretty vanilla, just jump in. It was like very, and you just knew it, right? Like you're just talking about, you described like the months of the year, and for the brokers listening, I think we had a good about 10-year period, about a full decade of that, of the I would call it like a Goldilocks era for us in the Medicare industry with, there's disruption every year, right? There's, hey, you got to start doing call recordings, or hey, we're implementing scope of appointments, or we're doing some big initiative this year, and there's usually one or two or three big kind of changes that are impacting the industry in a year. And this year there's 25 major things that are happening.
Yeah. And even during the COVID years, at least the carrier structure and the cadence of the industry was pretty similar, So
and talking about like the only question was, is AHIP going to come out in June or July?
Yeah.
And whatever that date is, but then that carrier certifications would follow right behind. And to your point, hey, if I want to do a retail opportunity, I got to hurry and do certifications done. Or if I want to be a sales presenter for this carrier, I got to get it done. I'm going to hit up my FMO or the carrier for co-op money, and then I'm going to strategically map out my AEP, and I have a good 2 or 3 months to figure it out, and I have all the plan benefits, and I can compare all the different carriers and know where I'm going to focus my marketing efforts and implement a strategy. And that had all been very, again, like clockwork, on a good cadence, at a good rhythm, and that is not the case this year.
And so this year it definitely feels like everybody's kind of stabbing in the dark a little bit as far as marketing. And with the carriers, it almost seems like they've accepted their fate of this year just is what it is, and they're going to get what they get, and kind of like course correct later on. But everybody's tried to do the best they could with all the turmoil this year, and so here we are. So we want to take this episode and really concisely summarize some of the things that we've been talking about over the past couple of months. Talk about some of the struggles for carriers, systems, marketing initiatives, and brokers and FMOs, and hopefully you can adapt quickly and have a strategy, because that's what we're gonna have to do, right? Yep. We have our decision tree where it's like, if this happens, then that, if this, then that, and we have to have that ready to move quickly for marketing so we can be effective. So let's start. I kind of had seven.
Well, and I would also add that before we move on, I just want to add that I don't think that things are going to go back to the way that they were. Meaning that we talked about that Goldilocks era of everything being very, solidified with the bid process and the timing and everything else. I think that moving forward, we are going to have a lot of, disjointed, a lot of moving parts, a lot of things happening. And I think we're going to, the Medicare side comparatively to the ACA, like if you're selling, under 65 or ACA products, we call that window shopping, right? Like that week before you get information. Like in the ACA world, you don't know a week before even the open enrollment season what the premiums are going to be with the different metal tiers and what are the deductibles. You don't know. Like you find out that week before. And I think that we're going to start kind of meeting in the middle there. And on the Medicare side of the business, I think that we're going to have a trend where we're going to have a lot of disruption and moving parts, and that information is going to continue to be held closer to the vest, so to speak, and that the information is really not going to be present to you all until closer and closer to AEP. I think that's going to be the new, I don't want to say new normal. I freaking hate that term. But.
Well, yeah, I do think that that's right. So what we're saying is there's going to be some more chaotic years for the next couple of years, no matter what. And I think the first person that I remember really articulating that was Steve Warner from CEO of United Healthcare.
Yep.
And he said that at Medicarians on one of his keynotes was that, we're kind of settling into this uncertain era for the next little bit with Medicare. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why that is. And,
right.
and this year, kind of to start off, and we got to be careful, but, there's a massive event this fall that happens in November that we're not going to talk about from a one way or the other what happens. But what happens is the seniors really, not just seniors, but everybody really keys into that event.
Right.
And you have marketing dollars that get tremendously expensive because the airways are all flooded with information trying to advertise for not just, the main office person, but all of the local and regional and the seats at all the city, state, and county levels as well. And so marketing dollars just get really impossible, and attention becomes a premium.
Right. Well, and not only that, but vendors too, right? Because if you want to say, hey, I want to run commercials, I want to do a direct mailing, I want to do a newspaper ad, whatever that looks like, you're either going to have to outspend some of those other parties because there's only so much, right? And so they have such deep pockets that they are going to occupy that space. And so even getting a vendor to do it becomes more challenging. So I think that's going on. And I also think that it's like, everything's intersecting at that ugly XY axis of it's an important critical year with a lot of things happening with the Inflation Reduction Act and, PDPs and how that's all changing. And, we're going to see a fairly significant increase in benefits and cost shifting to the consumer. And it's important that people are checking their plans and coverage and benefits more so this year than in a lot of other years. And that's, intersecting with all the noise and attention of that other event.
Correct. And so we've gone through this before, a couple of different cycles, and every cycle, every 4 years, it seems to be more difficult, more noise, more chaotic, more polarizing, more at risk,
more dollars spent.
And of course, everybody in the country is paying attention to what's happening there, especially seniors. Everybody knows that voting block is very keyed in.
You said a no word.
No, we'll be okay. Right. Is very keyed in. We have to pussyfoot around because, otherwise we have to go through all sort of special procedures to get approvals and things. It sucks.
To get content out.
Yeah. Anyway, but what is unfortunate is when that event happens is very much smack dab in the middle of AEP. And it's literally right in the very middle of it. And so you have all the attention leading up to it and then all the aftermath. And so the headspace for a lot of these people is consumed, and they're not probably paying attention to, did I get my ANOC? It's probably going to be drowned out in the litany of other advertisements and solicitations that they're going to be getting. And people just frankly aren't paying attention. And that's happening at a year where there's been, like Dan said, 20 times more changes and disruption.
Well, and the other thing I want to bring to the attention since you said it is, I think we were going to talk about SARS anyway, right?
Yep.
So the other challenging part is, this year, in years past, a carrier would come earlier on in the year and really communicate and articulate with partners, with distributors, and sometimes even the broker manager and the agent at that local level of where disruption was going to occur and where it was going to happen, right? So that was great for the broker because ultimately they could strategize, figure out like what was the next best thing for their client, what were they going to do to kind of minimize that impact. This year, it just seems that all of the carriers that have disruptions, they're holding those things so close. They're not communicating. And I think that and you do, it's a requirement from CMS that you have to have your ANOCs out before October 1st. They have to go out in September. And so for the carriers that are planning to exit certain markets, again, sometimes they go out September 7th, sometimes they go out September 28th, whatever that may be, but they have to go out into September. Well, that's weeks away. I mean, we could be seeing SAR notices going out 2 weeks from the date that we're recording this podcast.
Yeah.
And so the whole point is that the brokers that are infected and the members have no idea. And I do think that this year it's going to be a wait, what? I mean, there's going to be brokers finding out at the same time that the member is finding out. And I think there's going to be some people caught, with their pants down, so to speak, where their clients are calling them saying like, I got this letter in the mail. What does this mean? And I think the broker is going to be scrambling to call the broker manager or the carrier to figure out and be like, yep, well, we loaded that into your portal, or we sent out like an email blast and it was kind of buried at the bottom and it was kind of hidden, and we did disclose it, but it's not going to be very overtly obvious.
Yeah. So let's just, I don't want to really name names very specifically, but there have been certain carriers as partners that came to us early and said, hey, we're leaving these states entirely. Yeah. Right. We still can't talk about it specifically on this podcast
October
yet,
1st.
But we do know there are carriers in states that are leaving entire states, and one of our partners in particular has been very good and very upfront and been like, hey, we're going to take our knocks. Here you go. Get ready to prepare.
But, and they've also been good to say, we're going to send you a list of the impacted members. You can line that up with the agent. We want to make sure that there's as minimal or less friction as possible. Here you go. And that's good. It really is helpful so that you can, cascade that down to the affected agent and the affected consumer. And just knowing that, like, hey, we can't get ahead of this. You got to wait until October 1st until it's compliant. But, it makes it, unless, and this is a compliance piece for all you brokers, you're not to disseminate that information to consumers until October 1st, unless they contact you and say, hey, I got this letter. What does this mean? Then you certainly can have a conversation, address that, and maybe set an appointment to start discussing other options. But of course, you're not able to disclose benefits in 2025 information until, the 1st of October.
Correct. And we hear trickle up from all these different players in the ecosystem, like doctors' offices and carriers and DME providers are contacting their beneficiaries or their clients and saying, hey, your plan's no longer going to be in network next year. And then they're reaching out to our agents freaking out. And I'm like, well, they can't say that yet.
Right.
But they're causing part of the problem.
Some vendors and suppliers in the chain that are not necessarily regulated by CMS are not following those rules.
Yeah, so it's been very chaotic. And what I'm seeing right now, and I hope this doesn't stay the case, but it seems like two big carriers in particular, I don't know if I want to name names or not. Probably won't. But they've already announced that they were going to have a lot of SARs. And what it seems like they're trying to do, we've been waiting for a big comprehensive list of all the states and counties where they're going to have these exits, because what you should do if you're a good FMO and you're a good broker is you need to help all your clients, right? It's all about the beneficiaries. And if you have a block of business that's no longer going to have a plan, you need to help those people out. Those are the most needy. Those are the, triaging your block of business. Those are the day one people that need help. And also from an effectiveness and a strategic perspective, you need to be going, who needs to move my plan? You should know that about this time of the year. Like, which of my clients do I need to service? Who do I need to move? Who am I servicing from October 1st to the 15th and taking care of those? And then I'm going into offensive mode.
Yes.
Right?
So, and to your point, you went exactly where you would think we're brothers or something. Mm-hmm. But, essentially that same point, it's a lot easier to save and retain a current member than it is to go and acquire a new one. It just is. If you're a good agent and you've built a relationship and you have a rapport, when you call that person, they're picking up the phone, right? They're going to answer. They're going to respond to you if you leave a voicemail, if you're a good agent. And so obviously we do teach and train our reps that, from a strategic perspective, you want to do as much of your servicing as you can, October 1st to October 15th, to convey new benefits, to kind of pre-sell or kind of set the table for the enrollment, or what, your recommendations are that they do with their plan. And if you can knock most of that out of the way during those first couple of weeks, and then have a monster, October 15th through 20th, and spend about 4 or 5 days, submitting those enrollments and taking care of your existing block of business or any disruption, then to Mike's point, then you can kind of go on the offensive and go towards net growth throughout the rest of the AEP season.
Yep. And that's how, we teach and train our agents to handle it. But what I'm alluding to is it's very frustrating with some of these carrier partners where they're keeping it so close to the vest. And what I'm seeing as of today, it seems like they may not even be planning on giving us FMO partners a comprehensive list of all of their service directions. What it seems like they're doing is they're sending out their national first looks, and there are just plans that are no longer listed, and you have to deduce where they had plans and where they're not plans. And that's extremely difficult to do. And I think the reason why they're trying to do that is they're trying to have their cake and eat it too a little bit. They're trying to go, well, we're having all these SARs and we're losing all these areas in these particular areas, but they don't want that to be the message and the narrative for their entire AEP season. Right. They want to kind of like sneak that out the door and not have that be the narrative in the marketplace. So then they can go, well, let's grow over here and let's add a lot of enrollments. And I think it's a fine line, a tightrope walk that they're trying to walk.
You sound like Jay Powell trying to make a soft landing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, at the end of the day, we need to help these consumers, right? Like if these brokers don't know, if it's not communicated very effectively that, hey, these entire counties, these entire states are being exited, your block of business and your clients are going to be left out without a plan.
And I think that's the hard part that I'm dealing with is absolutely from at least our perspective, if I really go, we want to consider the member, right? And I think at the end of the day, if you're CMS, if you're anybody, if you really believe in the dogma that we all talk about in the industry, you want to do what's best for the consumer. And I think it sucks to hold that information so tight. And I would, of course, prefer to know ahead of time where things are happening so that you can actually implement a solid plan and be able to utilize your time effectively to get to all those members and have one-to-one dialogue with them and get them on a good plan. I think by holding everything so tight and then being like surprise or not even communicating the information, it puts the agent in a very difficult position. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, is that member going to get the service, the love, the TLC that they need to navigate a new plan decision? Probably not. And I think that, ultimately, same thing, it's going to take a high sophistication level of a broker to really be intelligent, logging into multiple different carrier portals and actually looking at the first looks that are there and the plan benefits. And to your point, it's not going to be a blinking, flashing sign saying, we're not in these counties anymore. It's going to be like, hey, wait a minute, plan X, Y, or Z only shows these counties. What the freak? And it's going to take a lot of time, effort, and attention for brokers to be figuring that out this year. Again, not overtly obvious, and there's going to be people caught off guard. And if you're in the situation where you don't have a really solid relationship with your client, they may not be calling you. They are probably going to be shopping the open market, and then just who knows where your client ends up.
Yeah, that's the first step of it, are the ones where the plans aren't even filed and those plans are for sure gone. I think I got my tinfoil hat on today. But I think
should have worn mine.
Yeah, I think there's also going to be a lot of plans that need to crosswalk. Their plan is to exit or force people off one plan, and they can send out a letter. I don't remember off the top of my head what the process is.
So let's talk about crosswalks really quick, just so y'all know. Crosswalk is meaning you can sunset one particular plan and introduce a new plan. And, CMS will allow the carrier to just map that membership and drag it over to the new plan, but it has to be like to like. And that's the caveat of the criteria. So for example, if you have a plan that you're sunsetting that's an HMO and you're introducing a PPO, you can't crosswalk, or vice versa, because if you sunset a PPO, you have to introduce a new PPO. It has to be like to like. You can't, sunset, for example, a D-SNP plan and then crosswalk them onto a traditional MAPD plan. So that's the challenge. And so with some of these moves that are going to be happening, there are going to be certain plans where, they're introducing new plans and you won't, as a broker, have to take any action. Some of those members will automatically move over. There's going to be, I think, more of the case where there is going to be situations where you are going to have to take action and do a re-enrollment.
Well, and what I've seen in the past and what I'm concerned about is I've seen carriers where they send the letter to crosswalk, and if the beneficiary doesn't take action or call, or they walk them through, or they respond to that letter, then they just get disenrolled from the plan anyway. And so it has the effect of they're not necessarily SARring that plan, but they are crosswalking to that one. And so for the carrier, it's like, well, if you don't join the new plan, then you're just off the old one. And
but let's be honest too. The other thing that goes along with that, Mike, is it's friction.
Yeah.
Whenever I talk about the industry is, you don't want to create friction. And anytime you as a carrier create friction, that puts the consumer into a wait, what is going on? What's happening? I kind of understand what this letter's saying, but I kind of don't. And then they take to the internet, or they talk to a friend, or they start making phone calls. And before you know it, the intention was to have that person not go shop and to just make a transition very seamless, but it doesn't happen. And before you know it, that person's looking for a new plan and may not ultimately crosswalk, just because by the time they picked up the phone and shopped around or talked to a friend, they now, enrolled into a different plan.
Yeah, and I had that situation happen to me personally from some of my block of business in Hawaii. Last year, there was a carrier that sent out the letters. Most of them don't even check their mail or know how to get it. And then all of a sudden, they all ended up with plans as of without anything. They got kicked back to original Medicare as of January 1st. And I had 30 people that all of a sudden I didn't even know were losing plans or needed to respond to this letter, or they were losing it. I thought they were good to go and had a bunch of service work, and I'm not actively, doing that very much anymore. So it was a
You don't say.
Yeah, it was a
But we did get
difficult situation. Yeah,
we got them taken care of though. So
yeah, all my Hawaii clients, I love it.
They're great clients, by the way. Shout out to the good people of Hawaii.
Yeah, don't get licensed there. It's hard.
And it sucks to travel there too.
Yep. So let's talk about, we kind of got off track a little bit, but I wanted to talk about the breaking news that's kind of finally solidifying in the industry that most PDPs, standalone PDPs, are going non-commissionable for next year. And in fact, at this time of this, by the time you hear this, WellCare will have announced that all of their PDPs are going non-commissionable, new and renewals. And Aetna has already communicated that they will pay on new or renewals, but not on new.
Yeah, and so the biggest part is like twofold. One, and I think you're going to see the trend, and if you're savvy in the space, those are really two of the most major PDP players in the space. I mean,
correct.
Really,
WellCare has 6.6 million PDP members.
When you run quotes and you're selling MedSups to your client, and you run the quote, in the past couple of years, some of the most rich plans that would pop up and you would be recommending to your clients were either like WellCare or Aetna PDPs. They just were. You would have outlier situations with weird formulary issues where it'd be something else, but they control the lion's share of the PDP market, and so for them to announce that they're not paying commissions is a huge blow to certain distributors out there. I know of a handful of distributors, that we're very friendly with that, are probably going to be impacted to the tunes. Don't need regulators listening, but millions of dollars that they're going to be impacted by losing those renewals. And then I'm also thinking about just the impact of, brokers in the agent community who's out there even selling MedSup, right? Like, I feel like, and it's weird. I honestly do not understand this, and I'll just bring it up here. I feel like we're really fair and balanced. I've always been that way when it comes to Medicare Advantage and Medicare Supplement, and understanding the pros and cons and the right scenarios and situations to present it to the right consumer. But yet I feel like there's this whole element of like the Crips versus the Bloods, in the industry. Like, I'm a MedSup, never Med Advantage, Medicare disadvantage. They're the worst. And, there's such a hard divide there in the distribution community. I don't understand it. Like, I really don't get it. I think it's weird. But for those brokers who are in that camp of I sell only supplements and Medicare Advantage sucks, this is hard. This is a big pill to swallow when you're looking at not getting a PDP commission whatsoever. And, how do you even invest the time and the service work to help your customer, your client navigate those decisions when you're not financially rewarded? It's pretty hard to do. And and not only that, the other thing I would add to that, just so people understand, is with the Inflation Reduction Act, and when you're looking at the smoothing process and the $2,000 cap and the shifting of the costs and everything else, this is a direct result of that. And there's really, as you think about like business and like the risk reward, when you're going to go be an entrepreneur or a business or do something, you are investing risk and capital and resource and energy, and there has to be enough reward there for you to do it. And I think that the way that this legislation has come down, there's just not enough upside for these businesses to be doing these PDPs. There's so much risk and so much work and very little upside now that I think it's unfortunate.
Correct. And I want to add on to that too. And I've been seeing, I read all the forums that everybody's participates in. I participate in all those too. And I'm seeing a lot of agents kind of trashing WellCare, specifically Aetna, and a lot of these carriers. And I really want you to know that your anger and frustration is misplaced. The carrier in this circumstance, the carriers are not the ones that decided to make these changes. This is a direct result of legislation,
right?
And they have fundamentally altered the dollars and cents in that equation. And so if you want to be angry at somebody, be angry at the legislation that was passed, because
right.
Essentially we can carve it up however we want, but legislation was passed that was intended to lower the cost of medications, and it is doing that for some, but it's spread out the cost of that
population. Yeah.
It's spread out the cost of that to the majority of people. And even at this current point, and we haven't talked about this specifically, the demonstration process, which is essentially just a subsidization program from CMS, and Dan and I napkin calculated it out to the tune of something of $35 to $40 billion that CMS is trying to, essentially cover the bill on for these carriers and these seniors
for 1 year.
For 1 year, so they're not hit with these catastrophic cost increases this year. But that's not how our government works.
Well, and only
it's
that,
being challenged in the DAO, right? They got Congress sent a letter to the
Government Accountability Office.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but going back to that, I think that, you're going to have voices and people and brokers and agencies saying, well, look, we have this demonstration period though now, so why aren't they paying commissions? Because they're looking ahead, not at a 3-month or a 6-month window. These carriers are looking ahead to, well, what about 2025 and 2026 and, all the years thereafter? This demonstration period, even in, if it does, go through all these challenges and get approved and everything else, that was for a 1-year temporary thing. It's not sustainable. And I think these carriers are trying to look ahead to a 2 and a 3 and a 5-year window.
Correct.
And so they're making long-term decisions now based on that.
So for you agents out there that are frustrated, I want you to think about if you're in the leadership position with one of these carriers and the current situation is this demonstration period may or may not happen. It may get rescinded. You may have some additional smoothing, some subsidies for 1 year, but other than that, you're stuck with this new world. So unlike maybe the government, these insurance carriers actually have real budgets. Right. They have real dollars that they have to keep in their bank accounts. And so they're having to try to pencil out how to strategically deploy these dollars, right? And
so think about to what Mike said, if you're the government and you have a deficit or a shortfall, you just print more money, right?
Yep.
We've seen it over the last, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but you're like, oh, well, let's just print more money and we're good. If you're an insurance carrier, you don't just get to print more money. You have to hold your cash reserves. You have to have the ability to pay claims. You have to be sustainable. I mean, that's why you hire so many actuaries. The dollars are the dollars are the dollars.
You have to be accountable to the board and to your shareholders and to the public ultimately.
Right. So it's just very, very different. And going back to, let me just paint the picture more for the industry as well. Going back to MedAdvantage, it's not rosy in either way. So I talk about the Crips and the Bloods and the agents who are like, I don't sell any Medicare Advantage. That's crap. That's, they're going to restrict your, claims and they're going to deny coverage to make profits. And then, and they have networks and it's all restrictive and only get a med sup. Okay, great. But again, I've been very I think, fair and balanced to both MedSup and MedAdvantage over the years in how I train agents, how I present it, and then also when I was a broker selling products to consumers. And I do talk and say, like, look, in the MedSup world, you can sell that product. It's going to require less servicing. It's going to stay on the books longer. It's going to have a longer LTV. And at the end of the day, I really am agnostic as to which product, to put people on, that or MedAdvantage. But as I'm looking at that landscape too, we're seeing more and more on the MedSup side, more states going to the birthday rule, more of them. And you're also starting to see more GI. And so when you're starting to look at now, okay, now the PDP that I'm selling is that complementary product that goes along in that healthcare scenario. I don't get a commission on PDPs now. And now there's more states going to the birthday rule that pay a lower commission and more GI situations. And like for example, if we have these SARs, these plan exits on MedAdvantage, and you sell them a SUP, that's GI. That's guarantee issue. I don't know if you check your commission statements, but GI does not pay anything close to what underwritten business does.
Correct. Well, not only that, that's for the agent side of things and wanting to, do business that way. If you look at it from the beneficiary side of things, you're going to see guaranteed cost increases on the PDPs on those standalones.
Right. Most
of them are probably, the deductible's gone up to $590, which more people are going to hit a more expensive deductible. So essentially their true out-of-pocket costs are going to be higher.
Right.
And then on supplements, things were already trending to go up 15 to 25% across the board. And we still don't have clarity on if and how and when that Section 1557 is actually going to be applied, because if the government, the OCR, does hold those carriers that are principally engaged in healthcare services, holds their feet to the fire on that, you're going to see costs go up even higher, to Dan's point.
Well, but again, I'm not confident that one's really gray. We don't know about that 1557 because I also just read yesterday that the FTC ban on non-competes got shot down too. So I mean,
we're just everywhere. Like, who knows what's going to happen? It's the Wild West shootout.
Yeah. So just again, sorry to throw a grenade in this episode, but same thing. It's like, hey, we're just going to fly by the seat of our pants, make some rules. Let's just see what sticks. But that got shot down. And anyways, but going back to it with the MedSup, what we've seen, and I've tried to tell people, is you really look at the supplement carriers and whether they're, you have age attained, you have age based, or you have community rated. They've all been getting, or blended models, right, with some iterations of those. And they've all been increasing more significantly over the past years. If I were to look at like 2010 to 2020, or 2022 even, you would see, very stable claims, like, increases at the anniversary, minimal, and you'd always be looking for an average of like a 5% increase or lower. And over the past couple of years, with utilization going up, they've had more claims experience. You've had higher, on average, premium increases year to year, and that's all been reflective off of, claims experience, right? And so ultimately moving forward, if there is that Section 1557, like we were talking about, you're going to see those premiums really go up significantly on top of it.
Yeah. So we have a couple other key points.
So sorry, just to kind of summarize, I guess, in my long-winded train of thought, we weren't planning on talking about supplements on this episode, by the way.
Yes, we were. That was one of my things, was the prices and how it's going to affect beneficiaries. But
what I'm saying is it's not rosy anywhere. So like if you're a broker that's like, oh, I was selling a lot of Medicare Advantage and that's what I was recommending to clients, now I'm going to pivot to SUP. Oh, I was doing SUP, now I'm going to pivot to it kind of looks ugly everywhere, is what I'm telling you. And you still have to have the approach of being very pragmatic and being neutral and being able to present, not as this bias entering into a sales interaction.
So you said it looks ugly everywhere. That's a good segue or transition point to overall kind of what I wanted to talk about, which is the current state of things. And, we had Jay with Humana gave some good, a good summary of kind of the overall position that we're in, guys. And so I want you to, let's zoom out and take a very hyper macro view of not just Medicare and the health insurance industry, but where we're at as a country.
Yep. And I talked about this on our agency owner call. Yep. Every month we do a call with agency owners. We have, anywhere from 15 to 40 per month agency owners that get on a call, and we go through some of the stuff. And this was one of the things that I discussed just this week.
Yeah. So. And it's the fact that we as a country, our debt ratio, where I think I can't even remember what the current debt clock is, somewhere around 33 trillion, these fantastic unbelievable numbers. And I know that all seems like fugazi, like theoretical, but it's actually real money. And where we're at as a country right now.
And to explain that further, like, for people who don't, I'm not an economist, but, I understand business and everything else. When they have a shortfall, the government go like T-bills, like for example, they go to the market and say, hey, we need money. Give us your money that we need now to run the government or our initiatives, and we'll agree to pay you back interest on your money, right? Through T-bills and bonds and other things. And so
we're in debt to ourselves
and other foreign investors,
to the actors around the country, to investors in the country, and we have to pay interest.
Right.
And where we're at as a country, just like your credit card, if you're maxed out on your credit card and you've got a 30% interest rate that you got, a bad deal on, your debt servicing and the interest you're paying makes it really hard to pay your bills.
Yep.
We're at that times 100 with the country where our debt servicing.
Well, and we're talking about the debt servicing number that Mike will get to, but we have a twofold compounded effect with the deficit now, right? Which we didn't have back in the last 5 or 10 years. So meaning that our deficit was lower, but in the past 4 years, we printed about $6 trillion. And we have this debt. And what's happened is we have interest rates to investors as well, the country. So back years ago, your T-bills were paying like, I don't know, what was the interest on a T-bill, like less than 1% or something. And so we now have these very high interest rates have gone up significantly in the past couple of years. And all of you who are looking at buying homes or purchasing cars or other things, you're looking at the interest rates and how brutal it is, right? Well, guess what? That same effect is happening to our government and the money that we've borrowed. And so not only has the balance or the amount grown significantly, but the interest rate on servicing that debt has gone up a crap load. So it would be no different than you having a credit card and you're like, oh, I got like 2% on my credit card. It's almost free money. I'm going to go spend $20,000 because it's only 2% interest, no big deal. And then as soon as your credit card went up to 22% on that money, that is absolutely going to blow your budget and just screw everything. And so that is kind of the situation that we're in as a country.
Yeah, so this year in 2024, it's projected to be almost $900 billion just in interest to service the debt.
Your minimum, that's like your minimum monthly credit card payment kind of
almost
thing.
$1 trillion that the government has to pay out to service this debt. It's about 3.2% of projected GDP of our whole gross domestic product that we're taking in as a country that we're generating is going towards servicing that debt. So when we talk about the overall trickle-down effect of that, where we're now spending as much or more close, like I don't know the exact numbers with the military budget and overall Medicare just in debt payments, that's why these carriers, when they went to CMS and said, hey, our everything else, we're experiencing all these higher costs. We need higher our MLRs are bad.
Well, so that when they went to CMS and said, yeah, this reimbursement rate sucks for next year. All of our costs have increased. Our labor is up. Our technology is up. Everything's up. We need a higher reimbursement rate than this.
They said, ain't no more money to get. This is what it is. Where our credit card's maxed out. So again, unless the only options we have as a country are cut somewhere, or print more money, which causes more inflation, right?
It's a hidden tax because then you have less purchasing power.
Correct. We're not in a great situation financially to increase the funding environment for Medicare. So when Dan said it looks ugly everywhere, it is looking ugly everywhere. And so we're in a.
I've told everybody the genie is not going back in the bottle.
Yeah.
This is going to be, from this point, this calendar year is just the beginning of the next 3 to 5 years. It's hard to see past that period of time, right? Like I have a really hard time looking ahead to 10 and 15 years, but at least for the next 3 to 5 years, it does not look like a pretty outlook. And I keep saying, well, aren't things going to change and get better if so-and-so is now in office, or if things change, is that? And I was like, it really doesn't matter, because the financial situation we're in now, how they approach it and what their tactic or their strategy is to tackle this problem is going to differ, but it's still going to be ugly no matter who's there. And
to be fair, it's been both parties' fault for many years that have led us ultimately to this current situation that we're in. But we're in a funding crisis. It's trickling down to everything, trickling down to Medicare, and so it's not like they can just
and it's not fair to the retiree, right? But I mean, life's not fair. It's just, and sadly, should they, but as you look at, if you were in the same situation running a household and you have to start cutting your spending and starting cutting somewhere, you start with the biggest items first and work your way down, right? And unfortunately, Medicare is right at the top of the list with the military as the two biggest line item expenditures outside of the servicing debt.
Yeah, outside of interest payments.
And the Medicare dollar amount is going to keep growing because the number of beneficiaries coming into Medicare is going to continue to grow, but they're going to try to reduce the amount of dollars per head or per beneficiary into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so amongst that current situation with the overall country, the finances, now you have CMS that's essentially presented this demonstration period for the Part D, and they're like, just float us another possibly $40 billion to make this thing work from this legislation that we passed.
It's going to compound the problem, right?
Yeah, and it's, Inflation Reduction Act, you sit and go, who's that reducing anything for? Just... We're dealing with some of these consequences of decisions in the past. And so that's a high level macro view of the funding environment that's putting downward pressure on the Medicare environment and the funding environment in general. So when Dan said it looks ugly everywhere with MedSups and MedAdvantage, it is the overall picture is looking ugly. Now, what that's meant is another thing that I wanted to talk to was an overall degradation of benefits, right? Like we've been talking about, and we've been, there's going to be carriers that are cutting a lot of things, stuff like, dental, vision, hearing were some of the first things to go. But I've been a little bit surprised as I've been looking at some of the first looks, and some of these carriers are actually weathering it
Holding
better.
the line a little bit.
They found
some dollars in the couch.
Yeah, they found some dollars in the couch that they're able to look pretty good. So I actually think it's going to create, and I don't know if I want to go on record, but I think there's a couple dark horses that are going to do really well this AEP.
I'm sticking with my two.
We got the 800-pound gorilla, that's going to do really well. I think Devoted's going to do really well.
You named one of my names.
Yeah,
so.
Devoted's going to do awesome, and I'm going to go on record and say a dark horse in the industry. I think this year is going to be Cigna. As surprising as that may be, I think I'm
not making more commentary about them.
They're trying to seal the deal.
I'm not even going to step into that steaming pile of I'm not going there.
There we go. So I think that's it's creating this like almost winners and losers scenario, I feel like, with some of these benefits in some of these areas. And so there's going to be a lot of normal plan movement and disruption, but some plans are going to look ugly in certain areas and some plans are going to look really attractive. And so I will say that overall, that's one thing that the carriers, like Dan said, we got more reimbursement rate or more of the rebates back than we thought, and they were able to put that into these plan designs, and some of the plans ended up looking better than I think we initially anticipated they were.
Yeah, and then I'm not even going to go into the whole what's this year, what's the 2 year, what's the 3 year, what's the 5 year look like, what's the sustainability, what are the reimbursement rates, what are their star ratings, what are their there's a whole lot more to unpack than just looking at some line item benefits for a year, on plans and product design. But I think that the one thing too that we're seeing play out is investment into other parts of the supply chain that some of these carriers have made for decades that weren't necessarily obvious, that weren't, that people didn't understand why certain carriers were able to execute certain benefits, look very attractive, be very stable, and continue to grow. Now it's becoming more obvious that it took them maybe 5 or 10 years to have that, come to a fruition, but they're in a much better position, a lot of those carriers,
Yeah, there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about before we wrap for the day. I did want to talk about the current environment. We talked about it on a prior podcast, but it was kind of out of place. You have the current retail situation, specifically Walmart. That's become a boondoggle, in my opinion.
I think we talked about that already.
Yeah, we did. But for a lot of agents, that's causing issues because I've seen a bunch of agents either be like, that's ridiculously expensive, I'm out on that, I'm going to find different ways. Right. And then you have other people that are like, I guess I'll just kind of
I got nothing else going, so I guess
You know,
I'll get my margin squeezed.
yeah, take it on the chin and go with that. So you have a, traditionally, the Walmart opportunity has been big in our industry. But I guess I kind of want to wrap up by talking about one last thing, which is all these things that we've summarized today. I really feel like there's a demonization of the industry going on right now, like Medicare in general, a lot of the insurance carriers and FMOs and agents. And I'm seeing like so much finger pointing and toxicity in the industry going on. And I don't think it's heading for a good place. You look at, I'm seeing agents complaining about carriers, and we have some Facebook groups where we have seniors,
right,
and the seniors are always complaining about.
Well, so here's what Mike's talking about too. We have, with all these things that are happening in the industry, we're really trying more often than not to be pretty neutral, to not be biased. We're trying to give everybody information and educate brokers and people in the industry what's happening. But ultimately what we're seeing when he's talking about finger pointing is we see brokers obviously going to their clients and demonizing the insurance carriers and saying this Medicare Advantage company, they suck, and they're trying to deny claims and restrict access so that they can make profit off of your death, and then you have other people demonizing med sup carriers because of their premium, their rate increases and this and that and the other, and the agent is finger pointing and demonizing and villainizing the insurance carrier, right? Well, that's not professional. And by the way, like at some point, the carriers aren't going to take that from the broker community. And then you have the broker community, as things are getting more and more difficult, we're seeing more and more shady practices, either over on the phone with fraudulent applications or in the marketplace, people knife fighting in the streets over certain opportunities and turning in this broker and demonizing that broker. And the more and more that continues to happen, and it trickles up to the State Department of Insurance and the regulators and CMS, it just is more and more of a reason and a cause for them to, want to kind of wipe the board, so to speak, and break and blow up the system, in my opinion.
Correct. And that's, we could do an entire podcast on that, but it's kind of it's twofold. It's a calling it out in the industry, and it's also a little bit of a warning, right? Because look, we all know that insurance carriers are a necessary evil. I don't even like to call them that. They're when they function properly,
they serve a purpose.
They should serve a very good purpose, right? Of course, if a carrier over-indexes on denying claims and being too rigid and gaming the system and essentially profiteering the dollars out of the Medicare system, that's a bad look, and it's a course correction that needs to happen. In a perfect world, those carriers are taking the Medicare dollars. They're able to augment and enhance what the government has budgeted and be able to provide a good experience for those beneficiaries.
And more value per dollar.
And overall a better coordination of care, which we should do a podcast on, like coordination of care and value-based care in theory.
Better outcomes.
And better outcomes. And, the idealistic sense of it is. And unfortunately, there are dollars end up tainting a lot of systems, and it's the age-old show me your comp plan, I'll show you the behavior. And when CMS comes out post-MACRA and has all these, incentives based on healthcare conditions and chronic condition, and of course the carriers are out there like, well, yeah, let's load up. This guy's got diabetes and blah 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 blah, and they're
upcoding,
they're racking up the bill, and now we're seeing the other shoe dropping on that, where we're seeing this really mass villainization of the whole the industry in general. And I think a lot of regulators are sitting back and, it's kind of the squeaky wheel gets the grease type of mentality, where they're not able to look at the whole ecosystem as a whole, and they're not hearing from the millions of satisfied beneficiaries and consumers. They're not hearing from the millions of great brokers that are out there that are doing a great job, that are helping. They're hearing from all of the most complaining, the worst of the worst case scenarios, and then we're having these knee-jerk reactions.
Well, and I would say even societally, we're seeing more and more of that as we progress year to year, and this last decade and social media and everything else, just where we're at culturally and societally, there's a lot of that just negativity and pissing and moaning and everything else, right?
I know. I mentioned that Facebook group. We run a large Facebook group that's for beneficiaries to answer questions and things about Medicare, and it's pretty enlightening.
Right.
I mean, all seniors want across the board is a perfect utopian healthcare system that has the most amazing healthcare with the smartest, best doctors and best technology that costs them nothing, and they can get it whenever they want, whenever they want. Is that too hard to ask?
I know that's the theme, but we do get a very good pulse of where the consumer is at when you have a group of thousands and thousands of people and you're seeing the comments every day, and it gives us a pretty good understanding of all that.
Yeah, and I see that, and then I also see it for the first time ever in the broker community where everybody's just out there complaining against the carriers and Medicare and reporting each other and finger pointing, and this call center person stole my thing and I'm going to report them. And I'm like, we are, as a broker community, you need to be really careful about what is the outcome that you're trying to desire.
Right. Think about this, and this will be a very good example to hit home. How loud did everybody piss and moan about the Joe Namath ads, right? I mean, I'm using it as a case in point. I think it was total crap too, but I was always of the mentality of, be better than them then, be a better broker. Make sure you're providing a lot of value to your clients. And guess what? And if you do that, you're not going to be impacted by it. So that was, and if you are minimally impacted with it, oh well, you're going to spend less time going to acquire more business and grow your business than cry over spilled milk and go, spend 50 hours pissing and moaning about the one client that they stole from you.
Correct.
That's just the way I
exactly. And one of my favorite quotes and concepts from Gary Vaynerchuk is the market is the market is the market, right? And what that essentially means is the free market in a capitalistic market will eventually course correct. And when marketers ruin everything, it'll eventually come back around. And that's what happened for the time being. And as we saw with, the rise of all the big telebrokers and the national spend, it didn't pencil out long-term, right? The acquisition costs were too long. It was a poor quality of business. It would have worked itself out. It was already working itself out. But meanwhile, the entire industry complained about it, and brokers and CMS regulators got involved. And now where we're at is the market fixed itself anyway on free market principles, and that kind of worked itself out. And now we're left with is the residual effects of an overly egregious
policies and regulations,
regulatory environment, where now it's even harder to help the beneficiaries overall.
Yeah. So what I'm saying to, I think what Mike is saying is be cautious about how loud and how upset you want to be as a broker with your pitchfork in hand and your torches, complaining about the carriers, because this is just cautionary, I tend to think there's very smart people in private equity, in these insurance companies, in these, and if you push them to a breaking point, they're going to figure out alternative models. So I would just say be cautious and be tempered in, which ones are really battles that you want to go fight and how loud you want to be with some of these carriers, because there is going to become a breaking point. And the one last thing that as we're coming up on time, that we didn't really discuss, that I just want to make sure we put out there, going back to the Part D and the Inflation Reduction Act, we had a sidebar conversation about this. I already see this happening. I already see this playing out. Quote me on this podcast, whatever, but one of the very, very, very negative impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act that we are going to see in the healthcare space is that as these PDPs have degraded their benefits and have added deductibles and are doing things to adjust with the cost sharing shift, you're going to have a lot of beneficiaries who are not going to be getting their prescription drugs through their PDP or Medicare Advantage at all. They're going to keep using pharmacies from Canada. They're going to use pharmacies from Mexico or India. They're going to walk into a pharmacy. They're going to keep using GoodRx discount plans. They're going to say they don't have insurance and pay cash pay. And what that's going to do is it's not going to allow that Medicare Advantage, that coordinated plan, to know the meds that they're taking. They're not going to be able to know their conditions. They're not going to be able to properly code and diagnose people. It's going to impact star ratings, which is going to impact funding. It's going to cause a whole host and chain of problems that I see it. I don't know how other people aren't seeing it. And I just think that that's one really important thing that if anybody is out there listening, they should really second guess and question some of this stuff. But
yeah, I mean, it's the cake's already made, right? So we're going to have to live with that. So,
and if I'm wrong, I'll admit I was wrong.
No, I think that's exactly. I mean, it already happens to some level right now. You know, let alone when
it's going to be exacerbated.
When you show up to get your lisinopril and they're like, "Oh, it's going to be $10," and you're like, "I can get it for $3 with GoodRx."
Except for because $5 they kick back to the PBM.
Correct. Except for now, the pharmacist is gagged because you already said you have insurance and they can't give you that price. They got to charge you the higher copayment.
Yeah,
right?
And 50% of the money goes to the PBM.
Yep. So, I mean, we could do a whole other offshoot podcast on that structure and that the way that functions, and maybe we will one day. But again, guys, I'll just wrap it up by saying, you know, be the change that you want to see in the industry. Advocate professionally for yourselves. Get involved. Speak out to, you know, your local city, county levels. Be knowledgeable. The industry really needs professionals that can help people. Get involved with some of the regulatory bodies in a professional way where you can articulate how you're able to help beneficiaries, because ultimately that's why we all got into this business, is we want to be able to make good money by doing something altruistic and helping people. You want to feel good about what you're doing and enjoy it.
And to kind of take it home and bring it home to wrap up, we titled this the perfect storm and the perfect opportunity. We're talking about all this chaos. We're talking about how broken things are and how chaotic it is and all these major impactful changes and everything else. And, you know, again, going back to how is that an opportunity? Well, there's always opportunity in chaos, right? I mean, there's always, so going back to, if you're the sophisticated broker, if you're the one that's logging into your portals, you're seeing the disruption, you see where it's happening, you know, you have dollars to spend because you've already been in business for a while, deploy those dollars, put it into marketing, capitalize, seize this opportunity that's upon us. You're going to have more people shopping the market than you've ever had, for many of you, in your entire careers. You know, like, this is going to be a very, very, very big shopping year. And this is not the time to, you know, coast and take a vacation and this is time to go to work and service your clients, you know, do a great job, provide even more value than before, ask them for referrals, and do your, you know, client meetings, you know, be in front of people as often as you can and work your butt off and have a giant net growth this disruptive AEP.
Yeah, we're gonna win big. We're excited about this annual enrollment coming up. One of the things that we always find interesting is one of our best recruiting and onboarding seasons is right when annual enrollment starts, or about 2 weeks into it, when a lot of agents realize, my strategy wasn't very good, or I'm not getting the help and support I needed to, and I'm looking for someone else.
And near the end of AEP, when they go, I thought that I was going to do all right, and obviously what I'm doing is not working. And again, that's when we, to your point, do very well at adding a lot of new partners. So
if you're out there feeling confused, we'd love to have you. If your AEP doesn't go like you thought, love to have you. Matt's giving me a reminder, guys. By the time this drops, maybe we'll have 10,000 subscribers, but we're so close on YouTube to have 10,000 subscribers. Please like, comment, subscribe. I'm shocked at the amount of views we get. Comments, I'd love some comments down below, what you think, where we're right, where we're wrong. And then if you get any sort of value at all out of our podcast, we talk frequently about what are we getting out of doing this, you know? So please just at least subscribe, you know, because there is a lot of external value in what we're doing here, and we appreciate it. And we just like, you know, those things function as fuel for us to keep going.
All right. Catch y'all next week.